The colony on Cerilon Prime had been more than a settlement. It was a dream carved out of alien soil. Families had poured their lives into the frozen plains, turning ice fields into harvests, hollowed mountains into homes. For 30 years, it stood as a testament to what humans could do when they refused to die quietly in their cradle. And then, in a single night, it was gone. The news came like a hammer through the throat of Earth's council chambers. No distress call, no survivors. The orbital satellites above Cerilon recorded only fragments, flashes of plasma fire, shadows of ships not of human design, and then silence. 1,000,000 souls erased like sparks in a windstorm. For Daniel Reeve, captain of the heavy destroyer Resolute, the broadcast hit harder than most. His younger brother, Nathan, had been part of the colony's militia, guarding the mining outposts. Daniel had promised to visit one day, promised to bring him whiskey from Earth, promised they'd sit under the 3 moons of Cerilon and talk about the old days back home. That promise died with the colony. The politicians argued, of course. They always did. Some called for restraint, for investigation, for dialogue with the unknown aggressors. But Earth wasn't the same naive world it had been a century ago. Humanity had bled its way across the stars. Pirates, plagues, famines, and now this. One colony erased meant one thing to the millions still living off-world. If you let it pass, the next target would be theirs. Admiral Kestrel stood before the fleet assembled at Luna Dock, his voice cutting through every comm channel like steel. They thought we were weak. They thought we would mourn in silence, but every child burned on Cerilon is a fire in our chest. We will answer, and when we do, their worlds will remember what it means to provoke humanity. Daniel listened in silence, fists clenched, staring out through the viewport at the gray curve of Earth below. He didn't care for speeches, but he understood the weight behind them. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was survival, justice, and rage, all welded into one. The enemy had shown no hesitation, no mercy. Humanity would repay them in kind. The first strike force was assembled from across the Terran fleets. Battleships pulled from Saturn's rings, carriers from the Martian yards, destroyers like Resolute refitted for long-range assault. 1,000 ships, each carrying the ghosts of Cerilon Prime. The enemy was not a mystery for long. Scattered fragments from the colony's final hours pointed to a species known in whispers among traders and smugglers, the Dravari. Tall, predatory, with fleets that patrolled the edges of mapped space, like wolves circling herds. They had kept their distance until now, striking only when the prey looked unguarded. Cerilon had been their first mistake. Daniel gathered his crew in the mess hall, faces grim under the cold glow of the overhead lights. "You've seen the reports," he said. His voice was calm, but his chest felt like a furnace. They slaughtered civilians, families. My brother was down there. Maybe you had friends, relatives, maybe not. But that doesn't matter. What matters is this. We don't fight for revenge alone. We fight because if they get away with this, it won't stop. We are the wall between humanity and extinction, and I promise you this. Before this war is done, the Dravari will learn to fear the name of Earth. There was no cheer, no roar of approval, just silence, hard and sharp, like the click of a round chambered in a rifle. They were ready. The fleet departed Luna in waves, drives igniting like stars against the void. For days, silence ruled the corridors of Resolute, broken only by the hum of engines and the faint vibration of weapons systems charging. The closer they drew to Dravari space, the thicker the weight grew in Daniel's chest. He dreamed of the colony burning, of Nathan screaming his name, of ships blotting out the moons. Every dream ended the same way, with Daniel's voice whispering into the void. We will make them pay. The first engagement came faster than expected. A Dravari patrol stumbled across the human advance at the edge of the Aryan belt. 4 alien cruisers against 6 human destroyers. It should have been a skirmish, an exchange of fire and retreat. Instead, Daniel saw the patrol as something else. A message. "Target them all," he ordered. "No survivors." The battle was short and merciless. Human railguns tore through Dravari hulls like paper, torpedoes detonating with fire that lit the belt's asteroids into molten suns. Daniel watched the last cruiser break apart, its escape pods fleeing into the dark. He could have ordered them spared. He didn't. Cerulean Prime still burned in his mind. Mercy had been buried there. When the wreckage cooled and the void swallowed the last Dravari screams, Daniel stood alone at the viewport, his reflection hard as the stars. This was only the beginning. Humanity had unsheathed its vengeance, and before it was over, entire Dravari worlds would fall to ashes. The wreckage of the Dravari patrol still floated behind them when the fleet pressed forward. Shattered hulls tumbled slowly through the void, glowing faintly as fragments of alien plasma cores bled into nothingness. Some ships vented atmosphere for minutes, a frozen mist trailing them like the blood of a wounded beast. Daniel Reeve hadn't ordered the escape pods destroyed, but he hadn't wasted a missile to save them either. Their desperate blips on scanners faded into silence as the fleet moved on, leaving the survivors to the black. War had rules, but Cerulean had torn them apart. The Dravari had chosen slaughter, not combat, and humanity was no longer in the mood to lecture itself about restraint. For days, Resolute cut through star lanes, lit only by the glow of its ion drives. The crew stayed sharp, but the silence was different now. No longer the tense anticipation of departure, but something harder. They had drawn first blood. A wall had broken inside every man and woman on board, and behind that wall lay only fire. Daniel spent long hours in the command deck, staring at the tactical map as the fleet drifted closer to the Dravari border. Admiral Kestrel's orders were clear: push deep, test their defenses, find their supply worlds, and burn them to ash. No half measures, no waiting for negotiations. The only message would be written in destruction. The Dravari responded quickly. Within a week, the fleet intercepted another formation, this one larger. 2 battlecruisers and a swarm of escorts. They came at the humans fast, confident in numbers, confident in technology. The Dravari were used to facing scattered traders, unarmed colonies, ragged militias with more courage than weapons. They had not yet seen humanity united in wrath. "Battle stations," Daniel barked. The deck lights shifted to blood red. His crew strapped into their consoles, faces grim, hands steady. On the main screen, the alien ships drew closer, sleek and angular, their hulls shimmering with shields. "Target solutions ready," Lieutenant Hart called from weapons. "Lock railguns on the lead cruiser. Open with torpedoes. Make them bleed before they close." Resolute shuddered as her weapons roared to life. Torpedoes streaked through the void, their trails of burning plasma carving bright scars across the dark. Railgun slugs screamed forward faster than thought, invisible until they tore into Dravari shields and sent ripples of energy sparking across alien hulls. The Dravari answered with lances of blue fire, beams that scythed through the black and hammered against human shields. Sparks exploded across the Resolute's deck as one beam grazed her flank, the ship groaning under the impact. "Shields at 70%! "Hold them steady," Daniel growled. "Return fire." The battle raged like a storm. Ships darted and wheeled, volleys crossing in deadly arcs. Human destroyers fought like wolves, circling the heavier Dravari cruisers, striking hard, then vanishing into the void before counterfire could pin them down. carriers launched swarms of strike craft, darting gnats armed with plasma charges that bit deep into alien armor. Daniel's eyes never left the screen. He saw one of their destroyers take a direct hit, split in half, venting fire and screaming voices into the void. He forced himself to watch as her wreckage drifted, knowing every man lost was another weight on his shoulders. But the rage in his chest didn't falter. It sharpened. "Focus everything on that cruiser's reactor core," he snapped. Weapons locked, railguns thundered, and the Dravari battlecruiser shuddered. Its shields cracked like glass under a hammer. One last torpedo slammed home, and the ship erupted in a chain of fire that lit the void brighter than a sunrise. Fragments spiraled outward, glowing chunks tumbling across the black like burning cities falling through space. The second cruiser tried to retreat, but the humans harried it, tearing its escorts apart, ripping into its engines. Daniel didn't order surrender terms. He gave only one command: "No survivors." Minutes later, the last Dravari ship broke apart, split down the middle, burning silently in the dark. The silence that followed was heavier than any cheer. The fleet floated among corpses of metal, surrounded by drifting shards and dead crews. Daniel stared at the destruction and thought of Nathan. Every alien death was a repayment, but the debt was nowhere near settled. Admiral Kestrel's voice cut through comms. "The Dravari thought we would crawl back to Earth. They were wrong. This is only the beginning. Our target is Lysera Prime, their frontier supply world. We burn it, and they will know humanity has teeth." A ripple of cold anticipation spread through the fleet. Lysera Prime wasn't just an outpost. It was a lifeline for the Dravari, a hub that fed fleets with fuel and weapons. Destroying it would mean more than victory. It would mean humiliation, a wound too public to hide. The journey to Lysera Prime was long, weeks in the void, every day tightening the coil of fury inside Daniel's chest. He walked the corridors of Resolute at night, listening to the quiet hum of life support, the faint voices of his crew in their bunks. They tried to keep spirits alive with jokes, with cards, with stories of home. But everyone carried the same weight: the ghosts of Cerilon, the friends lost in battle, the certainty that more would fall before this war ended. Sometimes, Daniel found himself alone in the observation deck, staring at the endless stars. He thought of Nathan then, his brother's grin, his stubborn laugh, the way he'd written letters filled with hope about Cerilon's future. Daniel would never forgive himself for not visiting sooner, for not being there. That guilt had hardened into something else now. Not just sorrow, but fuel. Nathan's voice was in his head, whispering, "Don't stop, make them pay." When Lysera Prime appeared on the horizon, the fleet's tension broke into readiness. The planet filled the viewport, a green and gold world wrapped in clouds, ringed with orbital stations and shipyards. It looked peaceful from a distance. Like any human colony, but every satellite, every cruiser in orbit was a reminder. This was enemy soil. Admiral Kestrel's orders were blunt. No negotiations, no warnings. Strike with everything. Leave nothing for them to rebuild. The fleet surged forward. Carriers disgorged waves of fighters, darting through the void like knives of fire. Destroyers locked railguns on orbital stations, ripping metal apart with brutal precision. Torpedoes hammered into shipyards, detonating reactors that blossomed into fireballs large enough to scorch the planet's upper atmosphere. The Dravari responded with fury. Their defenses lit the sky, beams of plasma slicing through space, tearing into human formations. Fighters died by the dozen, their wreckage streaking like meteors toward the planet below. But the humans didn't falter. They pressed harder, their rage carrying them through fire and death. Daniel stood at the command deck, watching Lysera's orbit turn into a graveyard. "Target their stations. Wipe them clean." Resolute's guns thundered, hurling death into the void. An orbital platform cracked open under their assault, its interior spilling into space like blood from a wound. Another station detonated, its fragments raining into the atmosphere in burning streaks. And then the order came that silenced even hardened crews. "Glass the planet." For a heartbeat, Daniel froze. The words hung in the air like ice. Glassing meant orbital bombardment until cities turned to ash, until soil itself melted into glassy plains. It was not war, it was annihilation. But then he thought of Cerilon, of 1,000,000 lives erased in silence. He thought of Nathan, and he gave the order. "Target their cities." The fleet descended into brutality. From orbit, railguns and plasma batteries rained fire onto the surface. Cities erupted in storms of light, towers collapsing into ash, streets splitting into rivers of molten stone. The screams of Lysera echoed faintly across comm channels as Dravari civilians tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. Humanity's vengeance fell like judgment, unrelenting, absolute. For hours, the bombardment continued. Forests burned, oceans boiled, mountains cracked under relentless fire. By the time the guns fell silent, Lysera Prime was no longer a world. It was a scar. Ash hung in its atmosphere, storms of glass and fire churning endlessly. On the command deck, Daniel stood in silence, his hands gripping the rail. His crew stared at the screens, faces pale, eyes hard. They had done what was ordered. They had avenged Cerilon in blood 1,000 times over, and yet Daniel felt no peace, only emptiness. Admiral Kestrel's voice rang across the fleet. "Let every Dravari world see this. Let them know what comes when they spill human blood. Lysera is only the first." The cheers that followed were hollow, thin. They echoed through Daniel's ship like ghosts. Later, alone, he sat in his quarters, staring at a hollow image of Nathan. His brother's face smiled back at him, frozen in time, unaware of the war to come. Daniel whispered to the empty room, "I did it, Nate. I burned their world. But why doesn't it feel like enough?" Outside, the fleet turned toward its next target. Humanity had drawn a line in fire, and there was no turning back. The war had only just begun. The scar of Lysera Prime still haunted every viewport. The world had burned beneath the fleet, its clouds turned black, its oceans steaming, its cities nothing but skeletal ruins buried under layers of ash. Humanity had answered slaughter with annihilation, but the Dravari were not a race to cower. They were predators, and predators bit back. It started with whispers, scout drones vanishing on the fringe of Dravari space, a supply convoy torn apart near the asteroid mines of Orvos. Then came the first blow that mattered. A human colony on Hayden's Reach went dark, not with the silence of orbital bombardment, but with screams across comms, cut short by static. Survivors reported Dravari raiding parties, burning settlements, taking prisoners. It was no longer one massacre. It was war. Daniel Reeve read the reports in silence. Every line felt like a blade, carving deeper into his chest. Lysera hadn't broken the Dravari. It had enraged them. And now humanity was facing not isolated patrols, but an empire in full fury. The fleet regrouped at the Aryan Belt, battered but unbowed. Admiral Kestrel stood at the center of the command chamber, his face carved from stone. "They think we'll hesitate now. They think we'll regret what we did to Lysera. But regret is for cowards. They want war? We'll give it to them. Every strike they make, we'll answer with 10. Daniel studied the faces of the other captains. Some were eager, eyes burning with the same fury that had fueled the glassing of Lysera. Others carried shadows, their silence speaking of the weight on their souls. They had seen what vengeance looked like, and they knew there was no turning back. The Dravari struck first. A fleet of 20 ships descended on the mining colonies of Vera 9, overwhelming defenses, slaughtering civilians, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. The holos of the aftermath sickened Daniel more than he wanted to admit. Burned-out habitats, bodies floating in the void, survivors huddled in wreckage. He thought of Saralon all over again. When the human fleet finally tracked the Dravari raiders, the battle was unlike anything before. It began in the shadow of a dying star, its light dim, its surface writhing with storms of plasma. The Dravari fleet emerged from the glare, 30 strong, sleek destroyers, heavy cruisers, and carriers spewing fighters like swarms of insects. They had numbers, they had rage, and they had no intention of retreat. "Battle stations," Daniel barked. His crew snapped to action, the hum of engines rising, the deep growl of railguns priming. On the main screen, the enemy closed fast. Fighters screamed ahead, a cloud of death. Human interceptors met them in a frenzy, weaving between beams of plasma, missiles streaking in white trails. Explosions lit the void, turning the black into a storm of fire and debris. "2 enemy destroyers moving to flank," Hart shouted. "Bring us about. Railguns. Full spread!" Resolute thundered as slugs tore through space, slamming into Dravari hulls. One destroyer split open, flames venting into the void. The second survived long enough to return fire, a lance of plasma ripping across Resolute's shields, shaking the ship to its bones. "Shields down to 60. Hold them steady. Keep firing." The void became chaos. Ships darted, wheeled, tore into each other with relentless fury. Daniel saw one of their carriers take a direct hit, its hangars erupting into fire, fighters exploding in a chain reaction. Another destroyer drifted lifeless, split in half, her crew's last screams lost to the black. But the humans fought like wolves cornered. Every ship lost only sharpened their claws. Torpedoes hammered into enemy cruisers, ripping them apart piece by piece. Railguns roared like thunder in silence. Fighters sacrificed themselves to cripple enemy carriers, ramming engines, detonating payloads at point-blank range. Daniel's hands clenched the railing as Resolute locked onto a Dravari cruiser. "Target their reactor! Break them!" The ship's guns answered, a barrage of slugs tearing shields to shreds. The cruiser buckled, burning, then vanished in an explosion that lit the dying star's glare brighter for a heartbeat. But the Dravari pressed harder. They weren't just fighting, they were testing, measuring, and for every ship the humans destroyed, 2 more seemed to lunge from the shadows. "Enemy reinforcements inbound," a voice shouted over comms. "Another 10 ships vectoring in fast." Daniel's gut twisted. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a trap. Admiral Kestrel's voice cut through the chaos. "All ships, hold formation. We break here and they'll hunt us down piece by piece. Stand and fight!" The fleet obeyed. They tightened their lines, shields overlapping, guns roaring in unison. For hours, the battle raged, neither side giving quarter. The void filled with drifting corpses of metal, the graves of both fleets scattered across the dying star's light. Daniel lost track of time. He only knew the rhythm of battle, orders shouted, alarms screaming, the ship shuddering under fire, the endless cycle of striking and bleeding. His crew fought like demons, every man and woman carrying the memory of Saralon, of Lysera, of Vera 9. At last, the tide turned. Human persistence, brutal and unrelenting, began to crack the Dravari line. Their cruisers faltered, their carriers burned, their fighters dwindled. The humans pressed harder, every shot a hammer, every torpedo a dagger to the heart. And then, as suddenly as it began, the Dravari broke. Their survivors fled into the dark, engines flaring, leaving wreckage and fire behind. The battle was won, but the victory was hollow. Of the 1,000 ships that had left Earth, hundreds were gone. Carriers burned, destroyers shattered, thousands of human lives snuffed out in silence. The void around the dying star was a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen corpses. Daniel stood at the viewport, chest heavy, eyes fixed on the drifting wreckage. His crew moved in silence behind him, tending to wounds, patching systems, counting the dead. They had survived, but survival felt like a curse. Later, in the Fleet Council, Admiral Kestrel spoke with the same steel as always, but even his voice carried a weight. "We bloodied them. They'll remember this battle for centuries. But make no mistake, they are not broken. The Dravari will come again, harder, stronger. We cannot fight them on their terms forever." Some captains argued for retreat, for regrouping near Earth, for consolidating defenses. Others demanded escalation. More glassed worlds, more vengeance until the Dravari bent. The council fractured, voices rising, fury clashing with caution. Daniel said little. He stared at the hollows of the battle, the tally of dead, the burned wrecks of his fleet. And he thought of Nathan, of Caroline, of the promise he had made to himself. When the council turned to him, he spoke quietly but with fire beneath every word. "We cannot go back. If we show weakness now, if we let them think they can bleed us without consequence, then every colony we've built will fall. This war is not about vengeance anymore. It's about survival. Either the Dravari learn to fear us, or humanity dies in the dark." Silence followed. Then slow nods. Even those who had doubted knew he was right. But as the fleet limped away from the graveyard, Daniel felt no triumph, only exhaustion. The war was widening, the cost rising, and the fire of vengeance that had burned so brightly now felt like it might consume them all. That night, alone in his quarters, Daniel poured a glass of whiskey and stared at the hollow of Nathan again. His brother's grin mocked him, a reminder of promises broken, of justice that could never truly be repaid. "I'm doing this for you," he whispered, "but I don't know how much more we can take." The Dravari would not stop, and neither would humanity. The path ahead was nothing but blood. The war had entered its crucible. And in that crucible, Daniel knew, either humanity would be forged into something stronger than the Dravari had ever imagined, or it would burn to nothing. The fleet drifted in silence for days after the battle near the dying star. Silence, not because the ships were lifeless. Engines still hummed, shields pulsed, weapons cycled, but because the men and women aboard them carried exhaustion like a shroud. Too many bunks were empty now. Too many voices silenced forever. Daniel Reeve walked the corridors of Resolute, boots echoing against steel, eyes haunted by what he saw. Crewmen passed him with hollow stares, their uniforms smeared with grease or blood, hands trembling as they carried out their duties. They obeyed him. They fought for him. But the light in their eyes was dimming. Rage could only burn so long before it ate away at the soul. When he stepped into the mess hall, the silence was heavier still. Normally there'd be chatter, maybe music, maybe the half-hearted jokes of men trying to forget war. Now there was only the quiet scrape of utensils, the occasional murmur, the haunted look of soldiers staring at meals they barely touched. Daniel sat alone at a corner table, pouring himself black coffee that tasted like ash. He stared at the steaming cup, but didn't drink. His thoughts were elsewhere, on Nathan, on Saralon, on the smoldering husk of Lysera, on the thousands of human corpses drifting cold in space. "We've bled them," he told himself. "But not enough. Not nearly enough." The Fleet Council convened again 2 days later. Holograms flickered in the war room. Captains, admirals, scarred faces from across the surviving fleet. Admiral Kestrel stood at the center, shoulders square, voice sharp. "We've confirmed intelligence on Dravari fleet movements. They're massing near the Helios Rift, building for a counterstrike that could crush our outer colonies if we don't move first. But there's something else." The room stilled. Kestrel gestured, and a new hollow filled the air. A blurred image, grainy, captured by a long-range drone. It showed something massive in orbit above a planet. A construct, jagged, towering, bristling with energy conduits. "This isn't a shipyard," Kestrel said. "It's something older. Our analysts believe the Dravari found this relic centuries ago and built their empire around it. Reports suggest it's a weapon, something that can crack a world's crust from orbit." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. If true, such a weapon meant the Dravari hadn't destroyed Cerilon with ships alone. They'd erased it with something far worse. Daniel's jaw tightened. His mind replayed the silence of Cerilon's last transmission, the suddenness of its death. No ships could have done that so quickly. But a weapon like this? Yes. It explained everything. "Then we know what we have to do," Daniel said. His voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Find it, destroy it, make sure they can never use it again." Kestrel's eyes met his, hard, approving. "Agreed. The target is on Varus 3, deep in Dravari space. It will be defended, heavily. But if we can cripple that weapon, we cripple their pride. And we show them humanity doesn't bow." The decision was unanimous. The fleet would strike at Varus 3. The journey took weeks. Through hostile sectors, past ambushes, skirmishes, sabotage, every day brought more scars to the fleet. And every day Daniel's resolve hardened. This wasn't just vengeance anymore, it was survival. If the Dravari kept that weapon, no human world was safe. When they emerged from slip space near Varus 3, the crew of Resolute stared in grim silence. The planet was a wasteland, barren and gray, scarred with canyons that stretched like veins across its surface. Above it hung the relic. It was vast, dwarfing any human station. Black metal, jagged spires, glowing veins of energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. It looked less built than grown, alien in design, ancient in presence. Around it swarmed a fleet, Dravari cruisers, destroyers, carriers, a wall of steel and fire. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had seen battlefields, he had seen glassed worlds, but this thing was different. It radiated menace, an artifact of something older and crueler than the Dravari themselves. "Battle stations," he ordered quietly. His crew obeyed without hesitation, though fear flickered in their eyes. The fleet surged forward. The Dravari met them head-on, their ships wheeling into tight formations, lances of plasma lighting the void. Human railguns answered, torpedoes screaming across space, fighters clashing in clouds of fire. The battle ignited like a storm. Resolute shook under the first volley, alarms screaming as shields buckled. Daniel gripped the railing, barking orders, his voice steady even as fire rained around them. "Hold the line! Press through their flank! That relic is the target. Don't let them pin us here!" Ships exploded on both sides, blossoms of fire tearing apart the black. Fighters darted like wasps, missiles carving deadly trails. The void became chaos, wreckage spinning, flames scattering across the stars. Through it all, Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the relic. It pulsed brighter now, as if aware of the threat. Energy gathered along its spires, power building in waves. "Captain," Hart's voice cracked, "that thing, it's charging." The relic flared, and a beam of energy lanced out, striking a human cruiser dead on. The ship disintegrated instantly, split apart, her crew obliterated before they even screamed. "God help us," someone whispered. Daniel didn't flinch. His voice was iron. "Then we cut its heart out before it fires again. Helm, take us closer. All guns. Target those conduits!" Resolute roared forward, her guns blazing, rail slugs hammering into the relic's surface. Sparks erupted where they struck, tearing into alien metal, cracking its skin. Other ships joined, torpedoes slamming into spires, fire blossoming across the structure. The Dravari fleet threw themselves into defense, ramming, firing, bleeding to protect the relic. Human ships broke through anyway, their fury unstoppable. For every ship lost, another pressed harder, clawing toward the target. The relic fired again, obliterating a destroyer in a single blast. The screams of its crew echoed across comms, cut short in fire. Daniel's teeth clenched. He pushed the pain down, forced himself forward. "Keep firing! Don't stop until it falls!" Resolute's guns thundered, slugs tearing deeper into the relic. A conduit split open, energy venting in violent arcs. Another torpedo slammed into its core, detonating in a sun-bright explosion. The relic shuddered, its glow faltering, its spires cracking under the onslaught. And then, with a soundless scream, it broke. The explosion lit the void like a second star. Energy surged outward, tearing through Dravari ships, ripping them apart. The relic collapsed in on itself, shattering into burning fragments that rained down onto Veris 3, carving fire scars into the planet below. The Dravari fleet faltered. Their courage broke. Survivors scattered, fleeing into the black, leaving their dead and their pride behind. The battle was over. Silence filled Resolute. The crew stared at the screens, faces pale, eyes wide. They had done it. The weapon was gone. Cerilon's murderer destroyed. Daniel stood at the viewport, chest heaving, hands gripping the rail. His face was stone, but inside something twisted. He had thought destroying the relic would bring peace, that vengeance fulfilled would heal the wound. But all he felt was emptiness. Nathan was still dead. Cerilon was still ash, and the war was far from over. Later, in his quarters, Daniel poured another drink and stared at the hollow of Nathan again. His brother's grin felt like a knife. "I killed the thing that burned you," he whispered. His voice broke, but he forced the words out. "But it doesn't matter, does it? You're still gone, and I'm still here, and I don't know if I can carry this any longer." But he would. He had no choice, because the Dravari would not forgive this blow. They would come back, stronger, hungrier, ready to burn Earth itself if they could. And Daniel knew humanity would answer again, because they had no other path. The war was no longer about one colony, one brother, one scar. It was about survival, and survival demanded fire. As he finished his drink, Daniel set the glass down with a hard clink. His eyes were steel again, cold and sharp. "Let them come," he muttered. "We'll burn their worlds until the stars are graves." Outside, the fleet drifted in silence, scarred and battered but unbroken. Humanity had shattered the Dravari's weapon, but the war had only grown darker. And Daniel Reeve knew the bloodiest days were still ahead. The wreckage of the relic still floated across Veris 3's orbit when the alarms came. A scrambled transmission burst across the fleet's comms. Static, panic, broken fragments of words. "Earth, under attack. Dravari fleet. Luna defenses failing." Then silence. Daniel Reeve's chest froze as the channel died. The command deck of Resolute went quiet. His crew stared at him, wide-eyed, waiting for orders. "Say that again," he demanded. The comms officer shook his head. "That's all we caught. It came from the Sol system. Admiral, they're hitting Earth." The words felt like blades. Earth, the cradle, the heart, the one place they thought untouchable. The place they'd always believed distance and defenses would protect. Admiral Kestrel's voice came over the fleet-wide channel, sharper than ever. "All ships, change course. We return to Sol immediately. Burn the drives hot. We'll tear space itself apart if we have to. Move!" Engines roared. The battered fleet surged into slipspace, wounded but unbroken, every ship clawing toward home. The journey was agony. Days stretched into eternity as the fleet tore through slipspace, engines howling, hulls groaning from strain. Nobody slept. Nobody spoke much. They all knew what waited ahead. Daniel stood at the observation deck, staring into the swirling void of the slipstream. His reflection glared back at him, hard eyes set into a face that looked older with every battle. His thoughts circled like vultures. "They're hitting Earth. They'll burn our cradle like they burned Ceylon. My brother died there, but if they scorch Earth, we all die. Our past, our future, all of us." He slammed a fist against the glass, knuckles cracking. "Not Earth," he muttered. "Not while I'm breathing." When the fleet dropped into Sul, the sight waiting for them was worse than nightmares. The system burned. Earth's orbit was a battlefield of fire. The defensive grid around Luna, satellite guns, orbital forts, fleets stationed at dock, was in ruins. Wreckage spun through space, glowing fragments of metal, shattered stations trailing debris. Ships lay broken in orbit, burning as they tumbled. And above it all, swarming like vultures, was the Dravari fleet. Dozens of cruisers, destroyers, carriers, more ships than Daniel had ever seen together. They filled the sky, raining fire into Earth's defenses, burning everything they touched. The comms lit with desperate cries from ground stations. "This is Houston Command. We're taking bombardment. God. The skies are falling. Tokyo arcology breached. Tens of thousands dead already. Luna colony's gone. Just gone." Daniel's blood boiled. Every scream, every burst of static was Ceylon again. Admiral Kestrel's voice cut sharp through the chaos. "All ships, engage at will. Protect Earth at any cost." Resolute dove into the fray, guns blazing. Rail slugs streaked across the void, tearing into Dravari hulls. Torpedoes roared, detonating in blossoms of fire. Fighters screamed past, weaving through enemy swarms, detonating payloads in suicidal bursts. The void became hell. Dravari cruisers rained beams of plasma onto Earth's atmosphere. Fires bloomed across the planet's surface, city-sized scars burning where the beams struck. Daniel saw one lance tear through New Delhi, carving the city into molten ruin. Another hit Chicago, the skyline shattering in fire. "Target that cruiser!" Daniel barked, voice a snarl. "Rip its guts out!" Resolute's guns roared, hammering into the ship. The cruiser's shields cracked, sparks flaring. A torpedo slammed into its reactor, and the ship erupted, fragments raining down like meteors into Earth's atmosphere. "Another incoming! Bearing 312! Hart shouted. "Bring us about! Fire everything!" The battle raged with no pause, no breath. Human ships slammed against Dravari lines, fighting with the desperation of wolves defending their den. For every human ship lost, another rammed forward, sacrificing itself to take an enemy with it. Daniel's crew fought like demons. Sweat poured, hands bled, voices cracked, but no one faltered. Every man and woman knew. This was Earth. There was nowhere left to fall back. Hours blurred into chaos. The fleet clawed at the Dravari, tearing ships apart, burning them in orbit. But the cost was monstrous. Dozens of human ships fell, their wrecks littering the skies, their crews silenced forever. At last, the Dravari faltered. Human ferocity, brutal and relentless, broke their momentum. One by one, alien ships detonated, their hulks scattering into the void. Survivors began to retreat, engines flaring as they fled toward the dark. The battle was won. Earth was saved for now. But victory tasted like ash. Daniel stood at the viewport, watching Earth turn below. Fires still burned across continents. Entire cities were gone, carved into molten scars. Billions had lived there yesterday. Millions were dead today. He swallowed hard. Fists clenched. For years he had thought of Earth as untouchable, eternal. Now he saw it bleeding. Kestrel's voice came across the fleet. Weary but unbroken. We held them. Earth stands. But make no mistake, this was not their full strength. This was a warning. The Dravari will come again, and they will not stop until we are ash. The council convened hours later. Faces pale, eyes hollow, voices raw. They argued about defenses, about rebuilding, about fortifying Sol. But Daniel spoke only once, his voice like a blade. They came to our home. They burned our cities. If we wait, if we huddle here and hope, they'll come back stronger. We have only one path. Take the war deeper. Make them bleed so hard they can't think of Earth without choking on fear. Some captains flinched at his words. Others nodded grimly. Even Kestrel gave a slow nod. We strike again, the admiral said. Not because we want vengeance, but because survival demands it. That night, Daniel sat in his quarters, staring at the hollow of Nathan. The grin on his brother's face felt cruel now, a ghost mocking him. They came for Earth, Nate, he whispered. His voice shook, but his hands were steady. They touched everything we've ever built, and I swear to you, I'll see their worlds burn for it, every last one. Outside his viewport, Earth turned slowly, its scars glowing faintly against the dark. Humanity had survived, but the price was written in fire. And Daniel knew the next step. The war could no longer be fought in defense. It had to be carried to the Dravari heart worlds. Because if Earth burned again, there would be nothing left to save. The scars on Earth had not yet cooled when the order came. Entire continents still smoked. Millions were buried in rubble. Oceans were poisoned by ash. But Admiral Kestrel gave the command anyway. His voice carried across every comm in the surviving fleet. We strike their heart. There was no time for mourning. No time for rebuilding. If humanity lingered, the Dravari would gather their full strength and return. They had to bleed the enemy now, deeper than before, until fear outweighed fury. Daniel Reeve heard the words in silence, standing at the viewport of Resolute. He looked down at Earth one last time, its surface scarred, its cities burning. This was what happened when you waited, when you let predators circle. He whispered to himself, low and harsh, never again. The offensive began with everything humanity had left. Fleets were pulled from Mars, from Saturn, from Jupiter's shipyards, half-repaired cruisers, battered destroyers, carriers still bleeding from the last battle. Every hull that could still move was pressed into service. In the void above Luna, thousands of ships formed into the largest Terran armada in history. It wasn't clean, it wasn't polished, but it was deadly. Every ship carried rage. Every captain carried loss. Every man and woman aboard knew what waited if they failed. Extinction. Admiral Kestrel addressed them all one last time. His face filled the holoscreens, lined with exhaustion, carved with steel. We are not fighting for glory. We are not fighting for revenge. We fight because we have no choice. If we falter, humanity dies. If we stand, humanity endures. Strike with fire, strike with fury. Let them learn that Earth does not kneel. A roar echoed across the fleet. Not cheers, not joy, but a raw sound of defiance. The armada surged into slipspace, engines burning white-hot, tearing toward Dravari space. The first target was Narthis, an industrial world feeding the Dravari war machine. Its skies swarmed with refineries, its orbit wrapped with shipyards. The fleet hit it like a hammer. Destroyers swept in first, railguns tearing apart defense platforms. Carriers unleashed waves of fighters, darting into shipyards, detonating reactors. Orbital stations cracked and burned, raining fire onto the planet below. Then the bombardment began. Daniel gave the order without hesitation. "Glass it!" Resolute's guns thundered, raining molten fire into Narthus's surface. Factories erupted, cities melted into ash, oceans boiled. The world that had fed the Dravari fleets for centuries was erased in hours. Daniel watched in silence, fists clenched, as the planet burned. He thought of Nathan. He thought of Earth. And he told himself it was necessary. But a voice in the back of his skull whispered otherwise. How many innocents lived there? How many civilians screamed like ours did on Cerilon? He shut it out. They chose their side. They'll pay for it. From Narthus, the fleet pressed deeper. System by system, they carved a path of fire. Outposts burned. Mining worlds cracked. Supply stations were turned into wreckage. Everywhere they struck, they left only silence. The Dravari fought back with fury. Fleets met them in ambushes. Carriers hurled waves of fighters. Cruisers rained fire into human lines. Battles raged in asteroid belts, in nebulae, in the shadows of dying stars. Each time, humanity clawed forward, bloodied but unbroken. But the cost grew unbearable. Every battle left more wreckage, more empty bunks, more names lost. Ships staggered, patched with scavenged parts. Crews fought until their hands bled, until their eyes burned with sleepless fire. Daniel felt it too. His chest grew heavier with each name added to the dead. He carried Nathan, Cerilon, Earth, and now thousands more. Every death weighed him down, but he refused to stop. Because stopping meant surrender, and surrender meant extinction. At last, they reached the outer defenses of the Dravari core. The world of Thalrin hung before them, a fortress world, wrapped in rings of steel, defended by fleets so vast they filled the void like a storm. The battle began the moment humanity arrived. Plasma beams scythed across the black, tearing into human lines. Railguns roared back, slugs screaming into alien hulls. Torpedoes detonated in blossoms of fire, lighting the void brighter than 1,000 suns. Resolute shook with every impact, alarms screaming, consoles sparking. Crew shouted over the roar, their voices cracked but unbroken. "Shields at 40%! Port railgun offline! Enemy destroyer closing!" Daniel barked orders through the chaos, voice steady as iron. "Target their reactor! Don't let them regroup! Keep firing!" The void became hell. Ships rammed each other, burning together as wrecks. Fighters wove through clouds of debris, missiles streaking in white trails. Human ships burned, Dravari ships shattered, wreckage filled the sky. For hours, the battle raged, neither side yielding. Humanity fought with desperation, the Dravari with fury. And then, slowly, the Dravari line began to crack. Human persistence, brutal and relentless, tore through their ranks. One by one, cruisers exploded, carriers burned, destroyers split apart. At last, the fortress itself was within reach. Admiral Kestrel's voice roared across the fleet. "Target Thalrin! Leave it in ruins!" Resolute joined the bombardment. Railguns and torpedoes raining fire into the world below. Cities cracked. Towers collapsed. The surface erupted in storms of molten glass. Daniel watched it burn, his face stone. He told himself it was justice. He told himself it was survival. But deep down, a shadow stirred in his chest. "We're becoming them," he shook it off. "No, we're surviving. That's all that matters." When the bombardment ended, Thalrin was ash. The fleet drifted in silence, scarred and bleeding but victorious. Humanity had struck the Dravari's core. They had proved no world was safe. but victory felt hollow. Daniel sat alone in his quarters, staring at the hollow of Nathan again. He poured himself whiskey, hands trembling. "I've burned their worlds, Nate," he whispered. "I've killed them by the millions, but it doesn't bring you back. It doesn't bring Saarlon back, and it doesn't heal Earth." He drank deep, the burn clawing down his throat. He set the glass down hard, jaw tight. "They'll fear us now. They'll never forget what we did here, but I don't know if we're still human anymore." The door chimed. Hart entered quietly, uniform torn, eyes hollow. "Captain," she said softly. "Reports from the ground. Civilians. There were millions down there. Families. Children. They're gone now. Orders were clear, but—" She hesitated. "Some of the crew are asking if we've gone too far." Daniel's face stayed stone, but his chest twisted. He dismissed her with a nod, but when she left, he let the mask slip. His fists clenched, his teeth ground. Are we still fighting for survival, or just feeding the fire? But he couldn't stop. Not now. The Dravari had to break before humanity did. Later, in the council chamber, Kestrel addressed the surviving captains. His voice was calm, steady, almost cold. "We've cut deep. The Dravari are reeling, but they are not broken yet. Their homeworld lies ahead. One more strike, and their empire burns with it." The chamber was silent. Exhausted captains looked at each other, eyes hollow, faces gaunt. They had already burned dozens of worlds, lost thousands of ships, buried millions of crew. And now the Admiral demanded more. Daniel spoke first, his voice like iron. "Then we finish it. We end this war, no matter the cost." Some captains flinched, others nodded slowly. The decision was made. Humanity would march on the Dravari homeworld. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stood at the viewport, staring into the endless stars. He thought of Nathan. He thought of Carolon. He thought of Earth burning. And he whispered low and harsh, "When this ends, there won't be anything left of them. Not a city, not a name, nothing. And maybe then I can rest." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it, because vengeance had no end, and humanity was already drowning in fire. The fleet gathered in silence before the jump. Thousands of ships hung in formation, scarred from endless battles, patched with scavenged plating, their hulls blackened with soot. Every vessel carried ghosts. Every deck echoed with the voices of the dead. And ahead of them lay the last step, the Dravari homeworld. Daniel Reeves stood on Resolute's command deck, staring at the tactical map. The planet's image glowed faintly in red, a massive world of oceans and spires, the beating heart of the empire that had burned Saarlon, scarred Earth, slaughtered billions. "This is it," Admiral Kestrel's voice cut across the fleet, hard as iron. "We break them here, or the war never ends. Their fleets will fight to the last ship. Their world will resist to the last breath. But we do not stop until they are ash. Humanity demands it. The dead demand it." Daniel's jaw clenched. He thought of Nathan, of Saarlon, of Earth's burning cities. He thought of every friend buried in wreckage, every crewman screaming into static. His chest burned with rage, but beneath it, something heavier stirred, a question he didn't dare voice. If we erase their world, what's left of us? He shoved the thought down. There was no room for weakness now. The fleet entered slipspace, with engines burning at maximum thrust. Hours stretched into eternity as the ships screamed through the void, each heartbeat heavier than the last. Crews sat at stations in silence, hands trembling, eyes fixed on screens, waiting for the moment the stars would open, and hell would begin. When they dropped into Dravari space, the void exploded in fire. The homeworld filled the viewport, a blue-green jewel wrapped in rings of steel. Orbital fortresses bristled with weapons, defense grids lit the sky, fleets larger than any Daniel had ever seen swarmed in formation. The Dravari were waiting. "Battle stations!" Daniel roared. Resolute came alive. Railguns primed, torpedoes armed, shields flared. The hum of engines turned into a growl, the crew moving with sharp precision despite the fear in their eyes. The Dravari opened fire first. Beams of plasma lanced out, cutting through the void, smashing into human shields. Ships erupted in blossoms of fire, wreckage tumbling into the black. "Port destroyer down!" Hart shouted, voice raw. "Keep the line steady! Return fire!" Daniel barked. The human fleet roared back. Railguns thundered, slugs tearing through alien hulls. Torpedoes streaked across space, detonating in violent bursts. Fighters screamed ahead, weaving through firestorms, dropping payloads on defense platforms. The void became chaos. Daniel gripped the railing as Resolute dove into the storm. Plasma beams grazed their shields, sparks erupting across the deck. Crew shouted over alarms, consoles flared, the ship groaned under strain. "Shields at 60%! Starboard guns offline! Enemy cruiser closing fast!" Daniel's voice cut sharp through the chaos. "Bring us about! Target their reactor! Fire!" Resolute's guns roared, slugs hammering into the Dravari cruiser. Its shields cracked, sparks flared, and a torpedo finished the job, detonating in its core, tearing the ship apart in a sun-bright explosion. The crew cheered, but Daniel didn't. He saw only the wreckage spinning into the void, another grave added to the endless field of corpses. The battle raged for hours. Human ships rammed through defenses, bleeding, burning, but unbroken. Dravari fleets pressed harder, wave after wave, their fury endless. Wreckage piled up until the void itself looked like a graveyard. But humanity clawed forward. Inch by inch, shot by shot, they pressed toward the planet. At last, Admiral Kestrel gave the order Daniel had known was coming. "Begin orbital bombardment." A silence fell across the deck. Everyone knew what that meant. Daniel's throat tightened. He had given this order before. Narthis. Thalrin. Worlds that had burned because he said the words. But this was different. This was the heart of a people. He saw Hart's eyes flicker toward him, wide with hesitation. She didn't speak, but he read the question in her gaze. "Are we really going to do this?" He forced his voice steady. "Target their cities. Fire at will." Resolute's guns thundered. From orbit, molten fire rained down. Towers crumbled. Oceans boiled. Cities turned to storms of ash and glass. The Dravari screamed across comms, desperate, furious, begging for mercy. None came. The human fleet poured fire into the planet, relentless, merciless. Daniel watched from the viewport, face stone, chest burning. He told himself it was justice, it was survival, it was the only way. But deep down he felt something crack. This isn't war anymore. This is slaughter. The Dravari fought with everything left. Fleets threw themselves into suicidal charges. Carriers rammed human ships. Destroyers detonated reactors at point-blank range. The sky above their world became an inferno, debris raining into the atmosphere like firestorms. Resolute took hit after hit. Shields collapsed, hull plates ripped away, fires burned through corridors. Crew screamed as consoles exploded, bodies thrown against steel. "Engineering deck hit! We've lost coolant flow!" "Casualties across decks 3 and 4. "Captain, we can't hold much longer." Daniel's voice was raw but steady. "We don't stop. Not now." "Keep firing." The ship groaned, but it fought on. Railguns thundered, torpedoes streaked, fire poured into the planet below. And then, slowly, The Dravari resistance faltered. Their fleets burned. Their fortresses cracked. Their cities turned to ash. The homeworld was falling. Hours later, silence hung across the battlefield. The Dravari fleets were gone, their wreckage drifting as tombs in orbit. The planet below was unrecognizable. Scars of fire stretched across continents. Oceans boiled into steam. Cities melted into glowing plains. The Dravari Empire was finished. Admiral Kestrel's voice came across the fleet, steady but hollow. "It is done. Humanity stands. The Dravari are broken." The crew of Resolute cheered faintly, voices raw, eyes hollow. But Daniel didn't cheer. He stood at the viewport, staring at the burning world below, his chest heavy, his fists clenched. Nathan was avenged. Sarillon was avenged. Earth was safe. So why did it feel like defeat? Later, alone in his quarters, Daniel poured whiskey and stared at his brother's hollow again. Nathan's grin cut him like a blade. "I did it, Nate," he whispered. "I burned their world. I ended them. But I don't know if we saved humanity or killed it." His hand shook as he set the glass down. He pressed his palms into his eyes, breathing hard, chest tight. He remembered the screams over comms. The civilians. The children. The cities burning. "We're monsters now." The door chimed. Hart entered, her face pale, eyes haunted. "Captain," she said softly. "Reports confirm. Billions dead. Civilians. Entire bloodlines wiped out. The Dravari are finished. But some of the crew, they're asking if we went too far." Daniel didn't answer. His throat was tight, his chest burning. Hart hesitated, then whispered, "We won the war. But what have we become?" She left him alone with the silence. Daniel sat there, staring at the hollow of Nathan. His brother's smile frozen in time. And for the first time since the war began, Daniel Reeve didn't feel like a soldier. He felt like a murderer. The war was over. Humanity had won. The Dravari Empire lay in ruins, their homeworld a scar on the stars. But Daniel knew the fire they had unleashed would never fade. It was in him now. It was in every survivor. And he wondered if humanity had saved itself, or damned itself forever. The war was over. That was what the reports said. That was what the admirals declared, what the politicians broadcast, what the soldiers whispered to each other in the ruins of their bunks. The Dravari Empire was gone. Its fleets shattered, its homeworld scorched into a scar that would never heal. For the first time in years, no alarms blared, no comms carried desperate screams, no orders demanded another planet burned. But Daniel Reeve didn't feel peace. He stood on the observation deck of Resolute, staring at the stars in silence. His reflection looked back at him in the glass. Hollow eyes, gaunt face, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He had fought from the first massacre at Sarillon to the fall of the Dravari homeworld. He had killed more enemies than he could count. He had given every order without hesitation. And yet, staring into the quiet void, he felt no victory, only emptiness. Earth celebrated. Broadcasts lit the skies above shattered cities. Fireworks burst over continents still scarred from bombardment. Survivors poured into the streets, singing, cheering, clinging to the word victory, as if it would erase the graves beneath their feet. Politicians declared a new dawn for humanity. The council promised strength, security, a future where no one would ever dare harm Earth again. Statues of soldiers rose, medals were pinned to chests, names of the dead were etched into endless walls of stone. But for every celebration, there was silence too. Families stared at empty chairs. Colonies mourned voices never coming home. Veterans sat alone in dark rooms, trembling hands clutching bottles, eyes haunted by the things they'd done. Daniel avoided the celebrations. He stayed aboard Resolute, wandering her scarred halls. The ship was more tomb than vessel now. Too many bunks empty, too many voices gone. He carried them all in his chest. Nathan, his crew, the civilians on Dravari worlds. Every ghost clung to him. Weeks passed. The fleet limped home, ships patched with scavenged plating, hulls groaning from strain. Earth greeted them as heroes, but Daniel saw only exhaustion in their faces. They had won the war, but the fire in their eyes was gone. One night, Admiral Kestrel summoned Daniel to his quarters. The old man sat at a desk littered with data pads, his face lined with fatigue, his eyes still burning like steel. "You've done your duty, Captain," Kestrel said quietly. "You led your crew through hell. You avenged your brother. You carried the weight no man should have to carry. Humanity owes you everything." Daniel didn't answer. He stood rigid, fists clenched, chest heavy. Kestrel studied him, then leaned back. "But I see it in your eyes. You're asking the same question I am. Was it worth it?" Daniel's jaw tightened. For the first time in years, his voice broke when he spoke. "We burned them, Admiral. We killed their fleets. We glassed their worlds. We slaughtered their children. Tell me, how are we any different from them now?" Silence hung between them. Kestrel's face hardened, but his voice was low. "Different or not, we survived. That's all history will remember." Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to scream, but no words came. Because he knew the Admiral was right. Survival had been the only choice, but knowing it didn't make the ghosts go away. When Daniel finally returned to Earth, he walked through the ruins of his home city. Towers still crumbled. Streets still cracked. Fires still smoldered in the distance. He passed families huddled in shelters, children staring with wide eyes, survivors clutching ration packs. Some recognized him. They whispered his name, pointed, called him a hero, but Daniel didn't feel like one. He felt their stares burn into him, not with gratitude, but with questions. How many worlds did you burn? How many innocents did you kill? Did survival demand all of that? He had no answers. One evening, Daniel found himself in a cemetery outside the city. Thousands of graves stretched across the field, white stones glinting in the fading light. He walked among them, boots crunching on gravel, reading names etched into stone. Soldiers, civilians, children. He stopped at one stone. Nathan Reeve. His brother's name carved clean into the marble, the date marking the fall of Cerilon. Daniel dropped to his knees, staring at the grave. His chest ached, his throat tightened, his hands trembled. "I did it, Nate," he whispered. "I avenged you. I burned them. I killed until there was nothing left to kill." His voice broke. "But you're still gone. And I don't know if I saved humanity or damned it." Tears blurred his vision. He pressed a hand against the stone, his head bowed. For years, he had carried nothing but rage. Now, for the first time, grief crashed through him, raw and merciless. He stayed there for hours, whispering apologies, confessing fears, clinging to the silence of his brother's grave. Life went on. Earth rebuilt. Colonies regrew. The Council expanded fleets, built stronger defenses, swore humanity would never again be caught unprepared. New worlds were settled. New industries rose. New generations were born. But shadows lingered. Veterans whispered in dark corners. Children grew up hearing stories of fire and glass. Survivors carried scars no rebuilding could erase. And Daniel Reeve carried the heaviest shadow of all. He never returned to command. He resigned quietly, leaving Resolute to the next generation. He wandered Earth instead, a ghost among crowds, a soldier without a war. People still called him a hero. Statues rose in his likeness. But Daniel ignored them. He lived in silence, haunted by memories of burning worlds, screaming civilians, and his brother's smile frozen in time. One night, years later, he found himself back at Nathan's grave. The city was rebuilt now, towers gleaming, streets alive again. But the cemetery remained, untouched, eternal. Daniel sat by the stone, older now, hair streaked with gray, eyes hollow but calmer. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the night. "They call us saviors now," he said quietly. "They call us the generation that saved humanity. But they don't know what we did. They don't know what it cost." He stared at the stone, voice low. "I don't know if we were right, Nate. I don't know if survival was worth what we became. But I know this. You're gone, and nothing I did brought you back. All the fire, all the blood, all the vengeance, it didn't fix anything. It just left me empty." He sighed, smoke drifting from his lips. "But maybe that's the truth of war. You don't win. You just survive, and survival feels like losing in slow motion." He sat in silence, the night air cool, the stars bright above. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something close to peace. Not because